Getting close. Let's go to share screen. We're going to be on page 53 in Lev Shalem. And that is all now nice and good. Okay, great. So, oh, one second, I can do the whole hiding of that to make it easier for folks in this. All right, so we are 7:01, not bad start time. Finally figuring out the controls for the updated version of Zoom. I'm sure they'll change it next week. There was a question from the live studio audience before we began, from the people in the room, that I think will benefit people that are on Zoom, or those of you that are watching this in the delayed version through YouTube. And the question was, the translations don't always seem to be helpful. They don't always seem to be matching the Hebrew well, and they often don't read in a way that feels either poetic or spiritual or meaningful or significant. And this is a topic that comes up a lot, because as you've all heard me say multiple times, pray in the language you understand. But if the language I understand is English, and I'm not comfortable with the English translation, feel like it's missing something, feel like, when we reviewed it, it made more sense in what I was saying with the Hebrew, and the translation doesn't convey that, then that's a real problem. Because you can't go back to the Hebrew because it's not a comfortable language for you yet. And the English on the page isn't doing it for you very well either. So there are a couple of things to consider for this, and then we'll talk about remedies. One, the translators are not deliberately trying to manipulate the Hebrew. They are not going out of their way to distort the Hebrew. What the translators have tried to do in every prayer book that's ever been printed with anything like a translation is try to say, look, for the average person, in my mind as a translator, what will help them capture what I have interpreted as being the primary message of this particular paragraph? And I'm not going to worry too much about being literally true to each letter and each word of the Hebrew, because that's a foreign language. And if you try to render a foreign language into a one-to-one translation, you are A, going to break the grammar of the language you're coming into, and B, you're also going to commit one of the cardinal sins of linguistic analysis, which is to imagine that just because the word bite means house in English, that the word house means the same as bite in Hebrew. I know, sounds like they should, but what we mean when we say house, the emotional range that goes when we say house, the feeling in the cultural context of what it is when we say house is different in both languages. Yes, if you point at something that's got like, 2 windows and a smoky chimney coming out the top on a kid's drawing, both in Hebrew as well as in English, we're going to call that bite. But that doesn't mean that it has the same resonance in the language. So do we say house of Israel, Beit Yisrael, in a direct translation of the Hebrew? Or do we recognize that house of Israel doesn't quite mean much in English in a particularly special way? So should we say congregation of Israel? Should we say community of Israel? Should we say the great Rabbi Schechter's phrase, Catholic Israel, which totally throws people off because they don't realize that there is such a thing as a small c Catholic. It has nothing to do with Catholicism. That's based off the root of the word Catholicism, which predates, you can go crazy trying to figure out the right way to do it. Translators have to do that. They do go crazy because they're trying to figure out what is the precise best way to capture this in English without losing too much of the original Hebrew, but also not relying on literalism too much. And it's rough. But in that struggle is the secret of what we do individually when we pray, which is to say, recognize that we are never going to be capturing the meaning perfectly. Even if you were a native, not even modern Israeli, but native rabbinic Hebrew speaker, and you were living in the time of Akiva, and you knew the Hebrew front and back of his generation, which was when many of these formulations were first really being concretized, that doesn't mean that you can pray just by reading. you still have to find your own path in that meaning. Now, the words and the translations should be seen more as guardrails of a particular topic. It's trying to keep you from going off the deep end so that you don't end up, thinking yourself into either an error or thinking yourself into some deep corner of despair, or being Pollyannic about things and not actually thinking about the hard stuff. It's trying to shepherd you, but gently. It's not saying you must think about it exactly in this way, and this is the only way to think about it, and these are the only right words that should be in your mind. That's not what prayer is doing, even in the Hebrew, let alone in translation. So when we get to a prayer, we have to pause and reflect which path within this field of meaning that the prayer is bringing to me am I actually going to walk today? And the translation may help me there. The translation may not today, but I can then see in either the Hebrew or the English the boundaries of the field. This prayer is asking me to think about, to feel about, to reflect upon this particular topic with a couple of these highlighted points, and I will do that in my own words. If the Hebrew or the English is not working for you, then you find your own words. In the original time, that was what a Siddur was. It was an order of prayers. It was not a printed book of prayers. And you would remember the theme of each prayer and some of the phrases that were popular at the time and the beginnings and openings in order to link them up in an elegant way and hit the required elements. But in between, during the meat of each prayer, you were on your own. You were inside that field. The guardrails were there to keep you from, going off the deep end. But you were expected to actually find the words in your own heart as well. And that's something we've often been lacking in the modern Jewish community in particular. In fact, I had a teacher in rabbinic school, Reb Mimi Feigelson, and she would make us start each class with a extemporaneous prayer. And I'll tell you, the first week, everybody was deer in headlights. These are rabbinic students, but no one wanted to actually compose a prayer spontaneously. You'd see people try and jot things down before class in case she called on them. But she never called. She always asked for volunteers. She wasn't that kind of teacher to put people on the spot. But she was trying to force us to realize that prayer is meant to be something that comes from within, guided by what is from without. It is not something that is only about ticking the box of having said each word in the correct form. Now, these words are amazing and they are inspiring and they guide us beautifully. But if all we do is read the words, then we haven't prayed. And if all we do is think on the words in either translation or Hebrew, whatever we think is better and perfect, find our best translation ever, we still haven't prayed if we haven't allowed ourselves to explore that space of what that topic might mean to me and my life, my relationship with God, my world around me at this particular moment. So there is no perfect translation. There cannot be a perfect translation because tomorrow you will be different than you were yesterday. And neither of those will matter for today. And therefore, we can have translations that work reliably for us, and that's great. Find those that work. There are 1,000 different publications out there. You can even copy down my clunky translations when you like them. That's okay. Learn the Hebrew. That's okay. But again, even knowing the Hebrew isn't going to provide you with the perfect text if you're not recognizing it as making space for your expression, not limiting. So yeah, there's no perfect translation. We should be frustrated with it because the translations are never going to be precisely what's in mind. And that's not the fault of the translation. That is a call to us to actually put our heart into words as well. Let's go ahead and finish looking at the words of Friday night, and then we can continue this conversation with a few more pointers when we get to the end of tonight. All right, so we pick up right where we left off, page 53. We are in the semi-repetition of the Amidah. Remember, this is our delaying tactic, so that if someone arrived late from the fields or work in one of the factories, whatever, they're coming late to Shabbat, but they're there, but they began after us, so their Amidah is still going. We're done. We would be out the door if it weren't for some of these extensions. We do these, so we're killing time while they're finishing up, but we're filling that time with a meaningful opportunity of reflection. And we're picking up on page 53 at the second half. We just finished with the Konei Shamayim Va'aretz, the end of the kind of abbreviated version of the Avot, of the first blessing of the Amidah, and then we will transfer right into Magen Avot. And Magen Avot, as we go through it, has elements that are taken from the whole Amidah, which is pages 47 to 52. There's that whole long section of different blessings. This is kind of like the medley. If you were I'm going to date myself. If you were back in the days of LPs, you may remember they came out with medleys of the greatest hits of the 50s, the greatest hits of the 70s, and or symphonic medleys were very popular as well. No one wants to listen to a whole symphony. Let's just do the good bits and then go from one right into the next. I remember one selection that was very popular, Rocking the Classics or something like that, where they kind of tried to jazz up Beethoven and Mozart, and they would blend one bit of symphony to the next, to the next, to the next. That's what Magen Avot is doing. It's letting us hit the themes of the Amidah, which again, thank you for having that question right as we began, underscores my whole point, because this is a recasting of all of that, giving us another bite of the apple to see whether or not we can catch something different than what we just did only a few pages ago. So let's go through what it basically means and talk about what references it's making, and then we'll try and sing it. Magen Avot Bidvaro, shield of our ancestors with his word, Mechaye Metim B'ma'amaro, and he is the life giver, Mechaye Metim, the one that gives life to the dead by his speech. Okay, first two lines, or first two clauses, Magen Avot, Magen Avraham, this is Avot. Right? That is the same wording that is used in the first blessing of the Amidah. And then Mechaye Metim, that is absolutely Gevurot. It is screaming the blessing of God's might, which focuses on God giving life to the dead. So right here in these first two clauses, we've already done two blessings that were long paragraphs, but now we've condensed them down into tiny little phrases.
So that's the first question about the mistranslation. Actually, I agree with that translation. But if you compare that one to this one, there's no way you can really look at these words and see what they mean. But I looked up there and
okay, so up here, Hebrew to English makes sense if you're trying to translate them word by word. And I'm glad that that's helpful for you. But shield of the ancestors with his word, it's good poetry, but a lot of people, when they're actually praying, don't want like the abstract poetic idea floating around. They want God who promised protection to our ancestors. Right? What does it mean to shield somebody with his word? It's a promise. And what does it mean to shield? Do we really need the literal idea of a shield? Or can't we use the word protection? Because for most of us, we don't think in terms of swords and shields as being a strong figurative language as much as it used to. So yes, I tried to link it up to the actual word by word just to make it easier to learn a little Hebrew in the process. That's one of my ulterior motives. But ultimately, this translation is not a mistranslation. It captures the meaning of shield of the ancestors with his word, God who promised protection to our ancestors. I find that to be a perfectly reliable recasting of that meaning.
But it doesn't act as an aid to the Hebrew.
No, because this book was not designed to teach you Hebrew. Right? Let me make that an official statement. Most prayer books are not designed to teach you Hebrew. That is not their job, and it is not how they were put together. And if you try to learn Hebrew out of them, you will be deeply frustrated because that wasn't their job. Their job was to help you find those borders of the field so that you would be able to wander within that space safely within your own thoughts in a way that made sense, that space had been carved out, yes, by the original Hebrew, but it needs to be reflected in English that's going to matter for the people of that generation, which is why we don't still use the Silverman Siddur, which was the classic conservative Siddur for decades, because the these and the thous and the heavy vocabulary is no longer resonant for most people. But if you still love it, by all the means, drag it off the shelf. I think we can see one right over there.
it needs to be translated in a way that's meaningful. The Hebrew words themselves, I can read some, but they have absolutely no individual meaning for the most part. So the word shield versus protection
Mhm.
and that whole is just a question of which generation you're going to be looking at for the contextual meaning.
Absolutely right. And that's why it's important to remember that languages do change. Which is why a modern Israeli is not the best interpreter of the Siddur because they're using a different version, just like a modern person off the street from Orlando is not the best interpreter of Shakespeare. Doesn't mean that the modern person doesn't speak Hebrew. It doesn't mean the modern person doesn't speak English. It just means they don't get all of the references and the valence, the weight within the language of what it meant emotionally originally, which is why we hire scholars to translate these things or study Shakespeare, so that the rest of us can get more of the content as was originally designed to inspire us. So yeah, most people would rather read slightly less literal translation if it allows them to access the goal of the words more than the Hebrew 101 version. Now, there are interlineal translations, which will do word and then translation right underneath it. And it's very chunky, very blocky, even more than mine, but it will break it down to, first person, masculine, singular, and all of that kind of grammar stuff. And that is helpful for learning Hebrew. And I'm happy to make some recommendations if someone wants that kind of book. But for now, we're going to stick with my in-between version here and with the Lev Shalom. So moving on, we've done a vote, we've done Givurot. What's going to come next? The Kedusha, because that's the order of the Amidah. Ancestors, might, holiness. That's the three way it breaks down, which we talked about when we did our Musaf service. So, Ha'el HaKadosh She'ein Kamohu. The holy God, that there is, like whom there is none. And then the Aseret Yemei Shuvah, in the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, just like in the Kedusha, we replace the word Ha'el, God, with the word the king, Hamelech, because that's what we do in the Kedusha. So again, it's screaming out at us that this is a modified, abridged version of the Amidah. And then we get into the main topic, which is Shabbat, which is just what the Amidah does as well, once it's finished these three. Ameniach le'amo b'yom Shabbat kodsho. He is the one who rests his people on his holy Shabbat, or Sabbath day. Kivan ratza lehaniach lahem. For on these, meaning on the days of Shabbat, ratza lehaniach lahem, he wants or he is pleased to make them rest, to cause them to come to rest. Lefanav na'avod b'yirah v'fachad. We serve before him with awe and with fear. V'nodeh lishmo b'chol yom tamid, and we give thanks to his name every day, always. Me'ein habrachot, with the appropriate blessings. El hahodaot Adon hashalom. Therefore, God of thanks, or the God that is deserving of thanks, Adon hashalom, the master of peace. And yes, that's a Jewish phrase. Master of peace is not only used by other religions, it's ours. Mikadesh HaShabbat is the one that sanctifies Shabbat. Umevarech Shvi'i. And he is the one who blesses the seventh. The seventh, of course, is referring to the seventh day. It's just plain poetic references by using different synonyms for the target. Mikadesh HaShabbat, Umeniach B'Kedusha Le'am Mikdushe Oneh, who in his holiness rests his people, that they will be satiated with joy, with happiness. Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshit. This is a memorial to creation. Bereshit, of course, being in the beginning. But again, as you can see, even in my translation, I wasn't going to translate it as in the beginning, because it's clearly a reference technically to creation, because Bereshit is the first word of the Torah, the first word of the creation story. Now, you'll notice over and over again, we are getting this refrain, Hameniach, Lehaniach, Umeniach. That is the Hebrew root for rest, that we should come to rest. And this is dominating this time because it's Friday night. And on Friday night, one of the primary themes within this part of the prayer is that we are resting, because that is what's the hard thing to do on Friday. Right? Our brains and our bodies have been working all week. Depending upon your schedule, that could be 6 days, since Sunday of the last Shabbat. And now we got to stop. We got to rest. And this is highlighting that not only rest is available as an option, but rest is mandated. This is God telling us, chill. Not that we should, but that we must. And that doing so is a form of service. And that's hard for a lot of us. Many people are very anxious. They want to do more. They don't feel like they're doing enough. And there's only so many hours in the day, only so many days in the weeks in the, and this is saying, no, you serve God on this day by not doing other stuff. Put it down. Right? Put down the hammer, put down the pen, put down the checkbook, whatever. And even if you were using that for noble ends, on this day, don't. On this day, rest. And on Friday night, we need that message because that's the beginning of the process. And if we don't click into rest mode on Friday, it's going to be awfully hard once it comes around for Saturday.
Is there a reason why in certain prayers they use the word mania? Other prayers, other parts of the prayer, they use the word like Veneta?
Yeah, because different poetic references. There's not a hard line, right? Vayina fash, when we talk about the Shamru, is a straight quote from the Torah, so it works, but lahaniach is closer to the average conversation. Right? In the rabbi's time, they were also not speaking biblical Hebrew anymore. So even though they would quote biblical things and weave them into our prayers, they also wanted to pepper the basic prayers with as much everyday language as possible. And, lahaniach, to cause someone to rest or put something to rest, was a much more familiar term than vayina fash. That wasn't the term that was used in normal conversation. And then this was meant to be read by and understood by normal people. It wasn't supposed to be a scholarly dissertation. All right, let's go ahead and do the melody for this, or at least the most common melody that you might encounter. Magen Avot bidvaro, mechaye metim b'mamaro, Ha'el hakadosh she'en kamohu, Hameniach le'amo b'yom Shabbat kodsho, Hivam ratza lahaniach lahem, Hivam ratza lahaniach lahem, Lefanav na'avod b'yira v'chacham, V'nodeh lishmo b'chol yom tamid, Me'ein habrachot, or in our version, Me'on habrachot. I'll explain later. Ahel hahodahot, Adon hashagam, Mekadesh hashabat, Umevarech shevi, Umeniach bikdusha, Leamedu shnei oneh, Yecher lemahaseh bereishit. So that phrase that I gave you the two versions for me'ein habrachot or me'on habrachot, there's a debate. We're Jewish, why not? Of exactly what that word is meant to be vocalized as. They basically are the same without vowels, with slight variations in spelling. And me'ein is here, so I've translated as with appropriate blessings, but me'on habrachot is more referring to a well or a source of blessing. Both of them are perfectly fine. Technically, the grammar should be a little different of where we put a period and where we put the comma. We're not going to go down that road tonight. But both of those are fine. And if you hear them in different synagogues, that's okay. These are both widely accepted versions. And true to form, Ma'on habrachot is believed by the scholars of the conservative movement to be the most likely original composition. And so they default to the earliest version they can find. Whereas in many Orthodox synagogues, they will use the most recent version that they can find because that's the most recent tradition. And so they would like to stick with tradition for their own publication. All right, Then we get into the paragraph that in the Amidah forms the end of the section of our reflection about Shabbat. And this happens in every Amidah for Shabbat. Evening, morning, Musaf, afternoon, we do this following paragraph. So it's even more obvious that it's wrapping up the Shabbat theme. So let's go ahead and read and do a translation and figure out what it's trying to tell us. Oh, sorry. Thank you. That's on page 54. I totally remember that all by myself to tell people to turn the page. You know, next time I put these slides together, maybe I'll try to put a page number at the top. That will help for everyone else and me. So yes, we're at the top of page 54. And those of you familiar with our TI service, oftentimes we'll do this in English because I find it to be English that does resonate quite broadly for many people. Unlike Magen Avot, which I think many people struggle with the themes on reading through spontaneously. This one I think is easier to connect to. So, Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avoteinu, very common opening phrase, our God and the God of our ancestors, Ritzei v'Mnuchatenu, right? Be pleased with our rest. Ritzei is a hard word to translate into English because it can mean to want, it can mean to be appeased, it can mean to be satisfied, hence the term appeasement. So translators struggle with how to render these sentences into English. But basically it's God wants us to rest, and we hope that our rest is the kind of rest God wants. Hadshenu b'mitzvotecha, sanctify us with your commandments, v'ten chelkenu b'toratecha, and give us our portion in your Torah, right? We're asking for our due, right? God promised us the Torah. We want our share in Torah, and especially on Shabbat, that is when we often have more freedom, more time to explore that share of our inheritance. Sab'enu mituvecha, and you will satisfy us with your goodness. V'samchenu b'shuatecha, and you will cause us to be happy with your redemption, with your salvation, actually is probably the better word. V'taher libenu le'ovdecha be'emet, and purify our hearts to serve you in truth. V'hanchilenu Adonai Eloheinu be'ahava u'ratzon Shabbat kodshech. Now that's a long sentence, but it's grammatically we got to unpack this here. And endow us or cause us to inherit Adonai, our God, lovingly and willingly or according to your will, this holy Shabbat, Ve'anuchu v'Yisrael, the day on which Israel will rest, Mikadshe Shemecha. That is to say, the people that sanctify your names. The other term for Yisrael is the people who sanctify God's name. Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, Mikadesh HaShabbat, sanctifier of Shabbat. Questions or comments? All right, so it's talking about this powerful relationship between us and God that happens through Shabbat and through Shabbat rest, and that we are serving God by allowing ourselves to have this space of Shabbat, and that doing so opens up this opportunity for joy and satisfaction and fulfillment. There is nothing less satisfying than never finishing the race. That finish line matters. Yes, you got to keep running the next day, and there's another race to be run, or another leg of the race to be embarked upon. But if you were always on a treadmill with never a finish line in sight, it would be one of the most discouraging and depressing things we could imagine as human beings. And that was the way a lot of people lived for thousands and thousands of years. Probably hundreds of thousands of years. You didn't stop regularly. You stopped when you fell over. And then you got better, and then you went out and found some more berries, hunted more animals, and then you'd eat and be satisfied for a bit, and then you'd have to do it all over again. This is telling us, no, we don't have to live like that. We can actually live with a break, with a gap, and that allows us to see what we've accomplished. It allows us to reflect on who we are when we're not pursuing our activities, and that allows us in that stillness to actually feel something of God's presence that is often missing during the hurly-burly of the world. Okay, now, like I said, we often will read this in English in TI, but there is a melody as well that can be done. There are many melodies to all of these, of course, but this is one of the most common. Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avoteinu, Ritzei v'Mnuchatenu, קדשנו במצוותיך, ותן חלקנו בתורתך. צווינו מטובך, ושמחנו בישועתך, ותהה ליבנו לעבדך באמת, והנחילנו אדוני אלוהינו, באהבה וברצון שבת קודשך, וינוחו בישראל מקדשי שמך. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. Okay, and guess what comes next? Well, we finished an Amidah, and that means we are going to have a Kaddish Shalem. Remember, I mentioned that when we did Musaf, and I'll mention it again when we did Shachari. If you do an Amidah, you do a full set of that part of the service, you are going to see a Kaddish Shalem to come to demarcate its formal conclusion, that section, and any other things that need to be done will come afterwards. So this is why Kaddish Shalem comes here. Reminder that Musaf, in our Musaf classes, we talked about this in much more detail. So go check out that video. But just a quick reminder that the Kaddish tells us that yes, we praise God. Yes, we hope for God's sovereignty over the world, but we also recognize that our words are inadequate, that we could say every possible word in the universe, and we would never come close to matching God or expressing everything that we could feel about God. Another reminder that even in translations, there are limitations. I'm not going to go through the whole thing again, because we got that when we did Musaf, but I will point out just a quick melody reminder that this one follows the same pattern that we did for Musaf. It kadal v'it kadash meraba. Occasion goes Amen, and then onward and onward. So that's that same melody that you'll find in the Musaf recording. Yes. Oh, we're on page 54 still. Yes. Okay, so that is the Kaddish, followed by the Kiddush. And yes, that is the same root word, right? Kaddish and Kiddush both come from the word for sanctification. Of course, Kaddish is Aramaic, Kiddush is Hebrew, and Kiddush is in the gerund form, sanctifying. Yes. Yes. Yes, it is Aramaic, absolutely. Except for the very last line, Oseh Shalom, where we look for peace for everyone. But the rest of that is in Aramaic, which, ironic to us today, Aramaic was the equivalent of doing a prayer in English for most of our history. That is to say, from the Second Temple period on, that the average Jew spoke Aramaic better than they spoke Hebrew, because Aramaic was the lingua franca. People all across the Near East, north and south, and especially to the east, all spoke Aramaic. It wasn't a uniquely Jewish language. And today there are still people in Syria and Iraq that do speak various dialects of Aramaic. It's still a living language. Small, but still a living language. And so when they did the Kaddish, they deliberately wrote it in Aramaic so that everyone in the room, even those who weren't good at Hebrew, would know what they were saying. Which is now very funny because there are many more people today who know Hebrew than know Aramaic. So Aramaic has become archaic in a way that Hebrew, since its revival, is not. So yeah, it's kind of funny, but it is a good reminder that our ancestors had no problem praying in a language other than Hebrew. They were comfortable praying in other languages if it was more meaningful and easier for people to connect to. Doesn't mean that they jumped Hebrew. They still kept it a lot for most things. But when they were introducing new passages, they were okay. We also see in Yokum Porkan during our Torah service, that is also the top paragraph is written in Aramaic. And Beyana Rachetz, which is also during the Torah service, is another Aramaic passage. So they are sprinkled throughout our liturgy. Many people don't notice them because they're written in the same letters. But that's like saying, well, Spanish and French are written in the same letters. They're not the same language. It's a good way to annoy two different countries.
Rabbi, since the Second Temple on Aramaic was even during the time of the Maccabees,
Maccabee, well, I'm talking second temple, right? So I don't know for sure during the Maccabean period. I'd have to go back and check my books on that part of the history. But I know from post-destruction, Aramaic was very, very common. And we do know that it was around during the Maccabean time. If you read the book of Daniel, there are many portions of the book of Daniel that are written in Aramaic as well. So I don't know the precise calculation of whether it was more or less common during the time of the Maccabees. That is not off the top of my head. And I don't want to be wrong, so I'll tell you that we need to look that up. Like well, so Persian was Persian, right, which was their own, which was eventually became Farsi as we know it now. And then the Seleucid Empire, of course, was a remnant of Alexander's empire, so their official language was Greek, but the people around them would have spoken Aramaic. You know, they were a conquering empire, the same way that they proposed Greek all across the Mediterranean basin, even though most of the people there weren't Greek. And they still spoke whatever their local language was that was there before the Greeks or later the Romans came along. So, yeah. Well, Romans were Latin, but they still used Greek extensively throughout their empire because Greek was already a common language throughout that part of the world, especially the Eastern Mediterranean. So Greek was an important language among the Romans, even though, yes, Rome had Latin as their own language. So, yeah, people used to be a lot more polylingual than they are now. Well, certainly than we are in America. Okay, so let's talk about Kiddush, sanctification, right? So the Kiddush is the prayer that is best known because we are holding it a cup of wine while we do this. And Kiddush is essentially saying God created the world. God freed us from Egypt. Both themes are represented very strongly in the Kiddush. And that means that Shabbat is holy for both of those reasons. We just finished reading the second version of the Ten Commandments. We are reminded that Shabbat has those twin themes in the Torah, creation and liberation, because essentially by putting them together, we are saying, I am free to exist because I am created. I am living within a world that allows my existence to happen, and I am free to be me. I am not a slave to any earthly power. I am not forced to toil away on storage cities for Pharaoh or any other of the slave work. That the natural state of humanity is one of liberty to be able to choose our own destiny. And Shabbat represents that double theme beautifully, and the Kiddush in a few sentences encapsulates it very nicely. Let's go through our translation. Picture again. And then we will do a blessing. So we'll start off with a line that we often don't do here at TI, which is Savri Maran V'Rabanan V'Rabotai. By your leave, rabbis, masters, teachers. So what are we saying here? Well, we are asking permission to do the Kiddush. And essentially what we are saying is, one, I don't want to be presumptuous, right? If there's somebody in the audience, someone in the congregation with greater status, with greater kavod, greater honor, then by all means, stop me and you can do the Kiddush, right? I am doing this not out of arrogance. I'm doing this out of service to the community. And that is the underlying ethos behind that permission seeking. And the second underlying ethos of that permission seeking is honest. I'm not drinking this to get drunk, right? That this wine that I'm about to drink is not just me having a little tipple, right? This wine that I'm about to drink is for a sacred purpose. In fact, it is for l'chaim, for life. And so the traditional response when the leader will say those lines is to say l'chaim, which means we acknowledge that one, you are fit to do the Kiddush on our behalf, and two, we do not think that you are an alcoholic. Right? We don't think that you're drinking this in the wrong state of mind. We think that you are drinking this for good, healthy, proper, life-affirming reasons and such. Now, that little drama is only still carried in some communities. And if you don't know that that's what that little back and forth is meant to reflect, then it becomes a little bit of meaningless doggerel that people attend to the beginning of their Kiddush, and no one knows why they're saying it, and it really has very little impact, which is why we don't normally use it.
That's why
Yep, because it's a great honor to be asked to do the Kiddush. And so when we have a bar mitzvah, absolutely it is that young person's privilege to be able to lead Kiddush on behalf of the community.
Right. But one thing about that vibe, including the rabbi, most people are pretty drunk. And yeah, I think I said something at one point. Something they might be drunk, but they're drunk on Lahai's.
Okay, so I'm not going to go down the long road of the complicated relationship that some Jews have with drinking for mitzvah purposes and drinking to get drunk. Because unfortunately, like every community around the world, there are some people who look at alcohol as being their pathway to an altered state of mind, and not necessarily a more spiritual. Now, some people, it is a libation that truly is allowing them to express their communal affection more openly. It's a shame if people think that they need an excuse or grease to make that happen. We should be able to be joyous and open with each other without the permission that alcohol gives to some people. But we should also be able to enjoy something that in moderation can make a person feel good. And when done in moderation, it is certainly a pleasant blessing that God has given us. But yes, it is a complicated relationship, and many people do stumble on that line. And I don't want to point fingers at any particular groups. We can talk about that in more detail later.
They seem to think that because it was behind that made a difference. It's not.
Yeah, getting drunk on Purim and then driving over someone doesn't make it a holy act. Right there is always a limit to how much we can drink, and if you are becoming problematic in your alcohol, then it is no longer l'chaim. You can call it l'chaim every time you do those shots. That doesn't make it so. And you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to be honest with each other if you see another person that is abusing the system and abusing themselves, which is, a problem. But it's, again, the focus of this is not to get drunk. The focus of this is to take something that we've discovered that God allowed our world to generate, alcohol, and in moderation and proper preparation, it can put a person in a different frame of mind, which often is, in moderation, a nice state of being, when it's a very gentle effect on a human. Not something that should be sought constantly, not something that should be used to self-medicate for other problems in life, but as an addition to our daily activity, meaning Shabbat here, it can sometimes give us a reminder physically of the potential for joy that especially our ancestors didn't always get to experience all that often. So, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, Borei Peri Hagafen, who creates the fruit of the vine. And then everybody would say, Amen. That is the blessing over the cup. And then we do the blessing for Shabbat itself. Now that we've referred to this cup as being here because of Shabbat, and it is being drunk because of this purpose, we need to elaborate. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, asher kidishanu b'mitzvotav, the blue side of the page, v'ratzav vanu. Right? This is not the normal mitzvah blessing. It does a little sharp turn. You are the one that sanctified us with his commandments and favored us or wants us to do something. What is it that we are doing? V'shabbat kodsho be'ahava u'ratzon hinchilanu. And his holy Shabbat, in love, he gave to us, and as an inheritance. Again, if you could try to translate this in order of the Hebrew words, it just becomes gibberish. Zikaron lema'aseh v'reshit. Theme number one, as a remembrance of the act of creation. What do we mean? Hihu yom techila lemikra kodesh. This is the day of this is the day that is the beginning of the days that are holy days, the days that are called holy. So this is the first day of holiness. Now that is a two way of looking at it, which is why it's hard to capture in translation, because Shabbat is, of course, the first day to be declared holy, because it's day 7 of creation. You don't get much earlier than that. So it is definitely first, but Shabbat is also the first day listed whenever we list the holidays that God gave for us when we left Egypt. So calling it the first holy day is also a reminder of the Exodus from Egypt, which is theme number 2. And then we transition to that in the next line, Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim. this is also a remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt. So it's theme 1, bridge that applies to both of them, theme 2. Beautiful poetry, if you like Hebrew. Now, what are we going to say about this more generally? Hivanu v'chata, because you have chosen us, ve'otanu kidashta, and you have sanctified us. Sorry, mistranslation there. Not blessed us. You have sanctified us. You have made us holy. Mikol ha'amim, from among all of the nations. V'shabbat kodshecha, and you have given us this holy Shabbat, be'ahava, lovingly, uvratzon, and with your favor, you bequeathed it. It's our inheritance. Again, the order of the words in Hebrew doesn't match up to the translation all that easily. So, what are we saying here? We're saying this is a special token that we have between us and God. Talked about that explicitly when we went over Veshamru. Where that is an oath, a sign of the covenant between us and God. And this is referring us back to that idea. It is not saying we're better than everyone else, neener, neener, neener. It is saying we have Shabbat as a special gift. It would be like, if your favorite teacher in high school was giving out mementos to the kids at the end of the year, and the memento they gave to you meant something to you because it was a picture of the cover of the favorite book that you wrote your essay on and the teacher really liked, and that means something to you, right? Now, does that mean the teacher doesn't like the other kids in class? No, but the teacher gave you something special and they gave them something special. We don't need to be jealous of them. They don't need to be jealous of us. We should be glad that the teacher actually gave us something that meant something to us. This is ultimately what we're saying here in any place where we talk about chosenness, where we are appreciative of the special relationship we have with God, which is not to denigrate anyone else, and is not to create a chauvinistic atmosphere. It is instead meant to say we should treasure this special gift that God has given us. Let me just finish it off. Baruch atah Adonai mikadesh Shabbat. Again, our standard ending. Blessed are you, Adonai, the one who sanctifies Shabbat. Yes.
So Shabbat was the day that the Jewish people left Egypt?
No, Shabbat wasn't the day we left Egypt, but Shabbat is the first of all of the holidays mentioned when we list all the holidays. Even though Exodus, you would think, Pesach should be listed first because it's the first in order chronologically, and it's the first in order of the calendar. Nonetheless, every time we talk about holidays, Shabbat's right there at the top.
Wouldn't Shabbat be before Pesach?
It depends on. It depends on the week, right? And in any given week, Shabbat is always going to be Friday, Saturday, but Pesach could be Monday.
Oh, I think you.
Oh, there will always be a Shabbat before Pesach. Yes.
In case that, right?
Yes.
You say Shabbat first, and then you say.
And then we say Yom Tov. Indeed. And in fact, the Kiddush also changes if we're doing Shabbat and Passover at the same time. I'll have to do a supplemental about some of those changes another time because the melody changes too. And we always will pay reference to Shabbat first over the particular holiday because Shabbat is the most common. And there's a general principle in Judaism of tadir, ve'eno tadir, of something that's common and something that's not common. The common thing always comes first. That's why we put our talit on before our tefillin. If we wear a talit 7 days a week, we wear tefillin 6 days a week. So therefore, the talit is more frequent. And that means it gets position of pride. Okay, quick melody version. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. If anyone else is there, amen, they say. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher krishanu b'mitzvotav v'ratza banu v'shabbat kodsho be'ahava uvratzon inchilanu zikaron lemase Bereshit, ki hu yom tefillah lemikrae kodesh, zecher letziat Mitzrayim, ki Tivanu v'chata v'yotanu kidashta mikol ha'ami v'shabbat kodshecha ve'ava uvratzon hinchaltan Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashavat. Amen. Remember, if someone else is doing the blessing, you say amen for them. If you're doing the blessing, you don't say amen for yourself. Okay, what's that? We don't have Aleinu because we already went over Aleinu in our discussion of Musaf. So go see that video if you want to be reminded of it. Instead, we are going to finish off slightly later than I anticipated with Yigdal. But we've had some good, meaningful conversations. So, and I've said much of what I wanted to say. Yes. We are now on page 62. Page 62. Yes. There are multiple finishing songs that can be chosen. And as is being referenced, if you turn to page 60, there is a very beautiful poem that gets sung in some communities. And if I had better vocal apparatus, I would demonstrate it for you because it's got some English and Hebrew versions. The English starts off with, "The sun on the treetops no longer is seen. Dun, 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 da, da, da." But again, I am not properly trained to be able to do that justice. But Yigdal I can cover. Yigdal has a much more forgiving range.
But this was written by Bialik.
Yes, Chaim Bialik, one of the great Jewish poets. Yigdal, on the other hand, is a adaptation of a non-poetic philosophical text. So Rambam, that is to say Maimonides, wrote in his Mishnah commentary a set of 13 principles that he felt were essential for Jews to believe. It wasn't exactly normal for us to have catechisms, but he wanted to clarify, when we say a Jew believes, what do we actually mean by that? And so he put out a list of 13. Well, it's pages and pages long because Rambam was able to condense a lot, but he also used only as many words as he needed, including if he needed a lot of them. So it's pages and pages long, and it doesn't lend itself to singing. And so along comes a poet and says, you know what? I bet I can do this in 13 easy stanzas that rhyme. And that way we'll all be reminded of those 13 principles without having to reread them constantly. And it's been very effective. If you know Yigdal in either the Hebrew or the English, you can probably regenerate the basic list of 13 pretty easily. And for those of you who come to TI, you'll know that from time to time, I'll use the Lev Shalem English version and a shoehorn to put it to the melody in order to remind people of these 13 principles. Now, it's not absolute. There's been lots of argument about whether the principles are all absolutely essential or whether some of them are inconclusive or some of the details of these essays about them are wrong, because we like to argue and discuss these things because we take them seriously. But for today, I want to focus instead on how Yigdal is trying to pull together, and that's actually the wrong text. Sometimes I make double slides and then I put the wrong one in. Anyway, you don't need to know my workflow. All you need to know is I made a mistake. That's actually from Gaal Yisrael. That's actually the text from when we were talking about redemption before the Amidah, before the Hashkivenu. That's from the section that has the Micha Mocha. So yeah, I got the title right, and the rest of it I left on the cutting room floor because that's what happens with cut and paste. Let's go ahead and turn to something that actually looks like something, which is the actual text of Yigdal. So Yigdal is trying to give us this final sense of emunah, of faith, this final sense of understanding, this final big picture view. It is the end of the movie, and the camera is zooming out, it's panning out, and you're seeing more and more of the city, and you're realizing the full implications and full ramifications and the full scope of everything that happened to our characters during the movie. So it is our leave taking by understanding everything, just in case there was anything lingering in your mind that you weren't still clear on. We don't want you going home confused or unhappy or feeling that the world isn't right. Keep this in mind, and at least you'll be okay till next time, and then we can talk about it again. So let's go through the different principles and see what we can do in 5 minutes. Wow, I really do yen wrong sometimes. Yigdal Elohim Chai v'yishtabach. Exalt the living God, Elohim Chai, the God of life, living God, v'yishtabach, and praise. Nimsa v'ein et el mitziut. The translation here is very rough. Nimsa means God exists or is found, is seen, but his existence is not in time. There is no time limit to God's existence. So unlike us, we exist. We are a point in time and space. God too exists, but he does not exist as a point in time, nor echad ve'ein yachid keyichido. Unlike us, God is truly one, an absolute oneness, ve'ein yachid keyichido, and there is no other unity, there is no other oneness like God's. Right? When we say God is one, we mean it's something completely different than when I say I have one watch. Having one watch is not essential to the watchness. It just happens to be the number that I currently own. I think I've got another one in the drawer somewhere. But that's my point, right? Having this watch doesn't mean I don't have another one somewhere or that there aren't other watches in the world. When we say God is one, we mean God is that which can only be one, unlike everything else in the universe, which is going to be essentially not truly one in that same way. Like I said, this is the reason why it's a full essay and why we have the short version. Me'elam v'gam ein sof le'achduto. He is hidden, and there is no end to his unity. It's not. There's no boundary to it. You'll notice, by the way, this lovely refrain of finishing with toe, 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 toe as part of the rhyming structure, as well as the overall meter of the poem. Ein lo demut haguf ve'eino guf. He has no bodily form, and he has no body. He doesn't look like a body, and he isn't a body. Lo na'aroch elav kedushato. His holiness cannot be measured. Right? There's no way to get out a yardstick and measure God. Not in form, not in holiness. Kadmon l'chol davar asher nivra. He existed before everything which he created. Rishon ve'ein reshit le'reshito. He is a first, and there is no other first like his firstness. Again, it sounds much better in the Hebrew than it does in English. In English, we like synonyms. We don't like to repeat the same word. Hebrew loves repeating the same word to make emphasis. Hino adon olam l'chol notzar. Behold, he is the master of the world, or world master, l'chol davar, of everything that was created. Yoreh gedulato umalchuto, should be in awe of his greatness and his sovereignty or rule, or dominion, kingdom, take your pick. Shefan nevuato netano. He gave flowing prophecy el anshe segulato, to the people that are treasured, v'tifarto, and glorifies. So this is now where we move from what we know about God to God's relationship with us, to human beings. And all of this could be true, and God could never have bothered to communicate to us. And that's what the Greek philosophers believe about their absolute, unmoved mover, is all of that stuff, but they don't think it touches us because we're all dirty and that's too perfect and it's too far from us. And no, we say no. God connects to the world. We have the gift of prophecy. Lokam Yisrael, prophets, the Moshe od. There never arose in Israel another prophet like Moses. Navi umabit et tumunato. He was a prophet, able, a seer, to see the image of God. Now, a few lines ago, we said God didn't have a body. What do we mean here? Tumunato, we're not talking about a shape of God. We are talking about the impression of God in reality, in the universe. It's sort of like how astronomers can't see a black hole because it's black, but they can see the warp in the gravitational field around it that it makes in the universe. So too, we can't see God, but we can see the God shape that pulls the universe in certain directions. Most of us not so well. Moses could do it very well. What made Moses so special? Torah emet natan le'amo el, and through Moses, right, a Torah of truth was given to his people. Al yad nevi'o ne'aman beito, by his prophet trusted in his house, meaning his loyal servant. Lo yachal lifa'el v'lo yamir dato. God will never swap, never will alter his belief, meaning God's not changing God's mind. Le'olamim lezulato, forever and for no other. So fe ve'yodaya siparenu. Now we go to the personal. So we go generic or like universal, national, and now personal. That God is the watcher and the knower of our secrets. Mabit lesof davar bekadmato. God can see what will happen in the end of a thing from its beginning. Like God knows the outcome before we even have acted. Why? Because God's already there, even though we have to go poking along down our timeline. Again, philosophy stuff. Gomel leish chesed kemifalo, and God will give to the righteous or give to the kind people according to their deeds. Noten l'rasha ra kerishato, and he will give to the wicked wickedness or badness, better way of putting it, according to his wickedness. So you get rewarded according to your good, you get punished according to your bad. It's proportional, it's not infinite, you get what you deserve. Now, this doesn't mean like day in, day out. That's the whole point, where we have delay for repentance and opportunity to change and recover from what we're doing and make amends. God doesn't call our credit card bill due every minute. We get a lot of credit to work off of. Some people run up too big a debt, however. Yishlach lekitz hayamin mashitenu, and he will send for us the Messiah at the end of days, livdot mechake kitz yeshuato, to redeem those who wait for the end for his salvation, right? Who have hope for that time. Meitim yachayel berov chasto, God will give life to the dead through his kindness. Baruch ad shem tehilato, blessed be he, and praise is his name forever. That's it. All right. We are over time, so I'm just going to sing the basic stanza for Yigdal, but no, it repeats. The words are very methodical in their meter and rhyme. So if you know one stanza, you know them all. Yigdal Elohim Chai ve'yishtabach nimtza v'yenet el metziuto echad v'yen yachid keyichudo nelam v'gam en sof le'achduto. It continues then. Ein lo demut haguf, bam 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 bam, and all the way through down to the bottom of the page. That is the standard. So if you know it, you know it. You don't know it, learn it, and you'll pick it up. Like I said, the meter and the structure is very. It leads you through it very nicely. There's only a few places where it gets a little tricky, unless of course the rabbi does something silly like try to make you sing it. All right.
In other congregations, sometimes you're told.
Adon Olam is another crowd favorite. In many Ashkenazi communities, Yigdal was a standard Friday night conclusion, and Adon Olam is a standard Saturday morning conclusion. But that's not halakha. They're both poems, and they both are found in the service wherever they like. In some Sephardic communities, Yigdal or Adon Olam might be said privately at the beginning of the service. They're not concluders; they're openers. So these have found places in different parts of our service. And I'll just maybe leave with a little bit of that. Like I said, we touched on it a bit, but maybe I'll try and work it in next time we meet. That's an important thing to use as a reminder that we work ourselves into the prayers and we work our prayers into ourselves. That we need to recognize that these different prayers will mean different things to us at different times. And sometimes we have to move. Right? It's okay. You know, Yigdal, maybe on a Friday night, you're not thinking, right? It's not working for you. And yeah, I know it's hard. You've got somebody leading services and you're not the master of which pages we're doing, when we're doing them, whether we're doing English or Hebrew. That's okay. I get that. It's important to be together with a community, and you're not always going to get exactly what you want unless you're the one leading services, which, by the way, now that we finished Friday night, if you want to practice and leave Friday night, talk to me. And we can have you on the Bema, and you can pick which melodies you want to do. You can pick which pages you want to do in Hebrew and English. We'll still meet the basic structure of the prayer, but you get more control. But when we pray privately, both in public, but the parts that we do in our own words, in our own heart, or whether you pray privately at home, it's okay to explore this space. I talked about it being like an open field. Even if you are familiar with a particular pathway through that field, it's the way you've always walked, it goes right down past that tree, and then, there's a little overlook by the lake, and that's the path you always go. And in fact, the grass is already beaten down because that's the way you always go. Great, fine. Sometimes you need that familiar, but also allow yourself to wander. Read Yigdal, read Yishmechu, read any of the different blessings we have, and let yourself explore where you are. What am I actually thinking about these words? Can I look at them differently? Can I feel something different? Is there something here that today I need to hear that I didn't need to hear yesterday or last week when we were doing Shabbat, but this week I do need to hear? You're not going to find it unless you let yourself wander. When you get too good at all of this, it becomes very easy to become complacent, to just, I know these prayers, and even if I'm actually really thinking about them, not just, singing along, but actually thinking about the meaning, I think about them in the same way each time I say them. You got to get yourself off your own beaten path. Even if it's working for you, from time to time, explore. Check out what the other feelings are like. Just like a good relationship that you have with a loving spouse, it can't always be the same thing day in, day out, even if it's good. Sometimes you do need to just explore a little bit more of who this person is and what this relationship means to you. Not just it means the same thing every day. Even if what it means every day is good, you also have to check out the other elements of that relationship to get the full breadth of who you're in relationship with. And when it comes to prayer, all the more so, we have to explore this relationship because we're in relationship with the infinite, which means we're never going to run out of more things to encounter.
So Robert, back to that core thing, when you do the prayers like Shacharit and stuff, they're going to be less likely to see differences between prayers, right?
Right. Yeah, but that means they have more opportunity. When you are singing along with the congregation, it is harder to free yourself into those spaces, which is why we always make a mix of singing together and allowing people to pray privately, because we are very aware that when we sing together, we tend to be following a theme of that melody. We're following a theme of the tempo of the community, and that kind of steers us in a certain way, which is good sometimes, because that can steer us away from our own self, and sometimes we need that. But when we aren't singing together, all the more so we have room to explore a prayer or text however we feel we need to that day. And don't be shy about doing that, in the privacy of your own tefillah. So I set it as homework for all of you. You don't need to write this out, but when you come to a prayer, think of, how would I say this in my own words? How would I render this as something meaningful to me just at this moment? Not saying we should reprint the prayer book, because we're not, they're expensive. But how would I say this at this moment in my own words? Not just rehash it entirely, but allow yourself new expression. Allow yourself to focus on one element to the exclusion of other elements. As long as you're staying within the broad expanse of that area, you'll do fine. Once you begin to realize that you have a worthy expression within you that isn't only the words in the prayer book, then the words in the prayer book will mean more to you, because you'll recognize these as being expressions of other humans who have walked the same roads you have walked, who have lived similar lives, and who have tried to find their own way to express it. The prayer book is a book of poetry written by people, most of whom we don't even know, and many of which were edited communally, collectively, by what people together chose as being the powerful phrases that they like. Learn from that, respect that, add your voice to that whole symphony, and we'll see what the prayer book looks like in another 1,000 years. We will pick up next time, because we finished Friday night, we will pick up with the Torah service for next time. Ein kamocha with all of its majesty, pomp, and circumstance. It's significantly shorter. So if you want a nice short service to cut your teeth on, this will be a great one to practice. If you're just trying to make sense of how do we make reading a book spiritual when it comes to the Torah service, then definitely look for that next time as well. Thanks to all of our Zoom friends. Thank you so much for being there. And I will see you physically or in the ethereal realm of Zoom another time.